Now, in addition to downsizing, we've seen a large trend of subcontracting in the United States and elsewhere. And so when we talk about subcontracting, we're saying contracting work to an outside vendor when the employer cannot or does not desire to do all or part of that work. One thing I'd like to point out is that another video that I have for you to watch this week is a documentary called Flying Cheap. And this is a great documentary that illustrates so many of the concepts that we're talking about in this. And it has a lot to do with the airline industry subcontracting out to regional carriers. And so we see this phenomenon really well illustrated in that video. I really want you to take the time to watch that and think about the topics from this chapter. Now, sometimes we are completely outsourcing that work. This is a measure that organizations take to reduce cost, to have work done completely outside that organization. Now, when that work is done in another country outside of the United States, it's often referred to as offshoring. And we also see that there is movement of work within the country to another location. In particular, companies often consider the labor laws of a particular state and those that might be more favorable to them. So when we think of subcontracting and how it is governed by the Labor Management Relations Act, many cases subcontracting is a mandatory bargaining issue, but there are conditions when it is not. But all of these conditions must be met for it to be a non-mandatory bargaining issue. If it's motivated solely by economic conditions, if there is a common method of business in the industry, follows previous similar subcontracting practices, if there's no adverse impact on the current bargaining unit, okay, maybe just an expansion of work that's being subcontracted, if the union was given an opportunity to bargain over the changes of the subcontracting practices. But again, all of those conditions must be met for that to be a non-mandatory bargaining issue. Now, as you can imagine, unions are not fans of subcontracting, and so oftentimes there is an impasse, a sustained disagreement, a failure to reach an agreement, and we often see these issues go into arbitration, where a third party examines the issues and reaches some decision to move negotiations forward. There are factors that arbitrators look to. They are whether there is some contract language concerning subcontracting, whether there's some past practice, whether there's a history of prior subcontracting in negotiations, if the intended duration of the subcontracting decision is extended, and if the employer's business justification for subcontracting is particularly valid, and whether there's any evidence that this was driven by union animus or a desire to break the union. In that cases, the arbitrator would be more likely to rule in favor of the union. As we said previously, organizations often have a desire to relocate where the work is done, and in many cases, this is a mandatory topic of bargaining, except if the performance of the relocated work is significantly different from the previous location. Okay, we could see that being driven by technological change. And if labor costs were not a factor in relocating that work. And finally, if the union could not have offered significant cost concessions in terms of labor that might have affected the relocation decision. If those conditions are not present, work relocation would be a mandatory subject of bargaining. Now, there are aspects of work relocation that remain mandatory topics of bargaining, and those include the transfer of rights, okay, the rights that were bargained in a previous contract, transferring over to this new location. If there is some separation, there are mandatory bargaining of severance pay and also pension rights. Now, sometimes the change in work location or the subcontracting of work results in jurisdictional disputes. Now, jurisdictional disputes are disputes between two different unions on who should be representing these workers. And with the change in work may come some shifting and some questioning of who that work belongs to. And so workers within a bargaining unit, if they disagree themselves over work assignments, we see these jurisdictional disputes come into play. And how are these resolved? Well, they are often, if they're not voluntarily resolved, they are resolved through the National Labor Relations Board. And the factors that they consider are the skills and experience that are required to perform the job, whether there are existing union certifications, what the industry and local practices are, whether there are prior decisions based on arbitration, the employer's desire, and the cost effectiveness and efficiency in assigning the work to a particular unit or craft. Again, the NLRB understands the benefits of making these changes cost effective and efficient. Work scheduling, as we've said, is an issue that has long been a concern of unions, and increasingly we see that different ways of scheduling work are becoming attractive things for unions to pursue. Now, the scheduling of work is most times part of the management prerogative. Okay, it's about running the business. But unions can negotiate for certain arrangements that give workers more flexibility. Okay, so in a flex time arrangement, employees are allowed to start and finish at their discretion as long as the total number of hours in the week match what they are contracted to perform. We also see this in the form of a compressed work week, okay, where it's not as flexible, but we take what used to be 40 hours of work done in, let's say, 5 days and shrink it down into 4 days or less. Okay. Now, oftentimes these changes in work result in personnel changes, and generally the rule for making these personnel changes that is negotiated by unions is based on seniority. And so when we talk about seniority, we talk about basically the number of years of continuous service that an employee has with an organization. It is a fairly objective measure that we can determine pretty easily through data that is readily available. And it is something that is all employees who are covered by the contract, they possess some seniority. And so it's an easy way to make these decisions. It's also used to apportion out rights unrelated to job performance. Okay, so there can be benefits rights, eligibility for preferred schedule of vacation time. You can get different rights as you increase in your seniority, such as preference for jobs or shift preferences or bumping others during layoff. Now, there is an important concept of super seniority, and this is the fact that unions often negotiate the fact that union officials get the highest level of seniority in order to protect them, because organizations may prefer to downsize those people who are involved with the unions or officials in the unions. And so this is a way of giving those people more protection in the time of job displacements. Now, layoffs are scary and unpleasant, both for managers and for employees. And so we need to consider that there are many alternatives to layoffs that should be explored. Okay, so these are the things that organizations and unions should consider before enacting layoffs. So there can be voluntary leave. There may be people who want to separate from the organization. Those might include people who are ready to retire, but there might be early retirement that they want to take. And this may be beneficial to the organization because those may be higher paid workers, and in such they might even give an incentive for workers to retire early. And in that way, the worker benefits through those incentives and the organization benefits by shedding those higher salaries. We can have working hours reduced. So instead of laying off one employee, we have 5 employees reduce their work hours by 20%. We might see rotating layoffs where some people are laid off but then brought back, and while another group is laid off. Again, kind of spreading out the pain across workers. Relocation, as we talked about, could be an alternative, and job sharing, where 2 people do the same job but work half the time. Pay freezes are another way to, as an alternative to layoffs. Again, if this is financially motivated, pay freeze might mitigate some of those losses. In extreme cases, workers will agree to pay cuts. Again, it's better to have some job rather than no job. And that in some circumstances might require workers to accept pay cuts. We might have work rule changes that are an alternative to layoffs. Those might be rules that require a certain number of hours, as we talked about before, and those could be changed. We might introduce new products, introduce new markets. So an alternative to layoffs is growth. We might look at normal attrition, and we might look at our human resources plan and look at the age distribution of our workers. And we might, through that analysis, understand that these people are set to retire, so we don't need to do these layoffs. Oftentimes, we do hiring freezes in conjunction with many of these other types of alternatives. Now, there are some legal issues that we have to consider for seniority, and the Supreme Court has looked at this and made various decisions. They have permitted and validated bona fide seniority systems. So a bona fide seniority system is one that is enacted not just to protect traditionally advantaged groups and enacted to disadvantage traditionally discriminated against groups. So if there is evidence that a seniority system was only initiated to discriminate against protected groups, those that are addressed in the Civil Rights Act, in terms of age, sex, religion, race, and so forth. In those cases, it's not a bona fide seniority system. But if it was enacted as a way to make decisions and not based on discrimination, then it is bona fide. One way that organizations could enact anti-discriminatory measures is to retroactively give seniority as a remedy to past discriminatory practices. This might be part of an affirmative action plan for job downsizing. The use of seniority in layoffs is permitted where it may or does adversely impact minorities. It's not automatically unlawful if adverse impact is observed. It becomes unlawful when that adverse impact is intentional. Sometimes when affirmative action plans are part of the downsizing process, you get reverse discrimination claims from members of the non-protected group. And those claims are not valid if the plan was negotiated through the union and the employer, if most employees are not harmed, and if majority employees are not excluded from advancement opportunities.